In the 28-plus years since President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the only consensus on the killing is that the government's official explanation isn't believed by most Americans. Today, in the second part of our series, Who Killed JFK?, we focus on the theory that the Mafia did it. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that two members of the Mafia had the motive, the means, and the method. Dallas mob boss Carlos Marcello certainly had the motive. He was deported to Central America by President Kennedy. And Cuba's mafia boss, Santo Trafficante, was said to be infuriated by JFK's decision to restrict efforts to overthrow Castro, whose takeover had closed down the mob's Havana casinos. Only last month, Frank Regano, former attorney for Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa, dropped a bombshell by claiming that Hoffa had asked him to personally recruit Marcello and Trafficante for Kennedy's assassination. Congressman Louis Stokes knows the subject well. He chaired the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which concluded that there probably was a mafia connection. He's in our NBC News Bureau in Washington, and here with me in New York is organized crime expert Robert Blakey, who was chief counsel to the Stokes Committee. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Congressman Stokes, let me start with you, if I might, as we begin. In 1979, your committee found there was a probable conspiracy and that organized crime may have had a hand in that. On what basis did you then, and do you now, still hold to that judgment?
I think we base a great deal of it upon the electronic surveillance transcripts that were available through the FBI. There were a number of conversations between members of organized crime that did lead one towards believing that they could have been involved.
In other words, the wiretaps indicated they had talked about it, but did you ever hear a wiretap that could have been seen as more than just circumstantial evidence?
No, because one of the things we found was that in the case of Marcella and also Trafficante, they were two individuals on whom they did not have any electronic surveillance. On the other members of organized crime, they were able to get it. But these two were very crafty and very difficult to be able to get electronic surveillance on.
All right, and as we move to Mr. Blakey, let me note that much of your argument was also rooted in an audio tape that indicated that more than 3 shots were fired, which would mean that Lee Harvey Oswald had fired some of those shots, but that the other one had to come from a different direction. Let's look now at the tape of the Zapruder film with the audio that was added by the House Select Committee. Listen for the 4 shots. Mr. Blakey, we argued the merits of the 4th shot tape yesterday, but even if we accept that there are 4 shots, and for the basis of this conversation, let's do that, why the 4th one perhaps from the Mafia?
Well, they clearly were under an unprecedented series of investigations. Trafficante was, Marcello actually was on trial in New Orleans on November the 22nd. Both of them perceived themselves as being under extraordinary and personal pressure by the Kennedy administration. So they clearly had the motive, and they obviously have the character that's consistent with killing people.
If all that holds true, let's start then our talking about this on November 24th, 1963, which is when Jack Ruby entered the picture, and roll that now infamous tape when in the Dallas police station it was Ruby who came out of the crowd and shot Lee Harvey Oswald. As we watch this tape unfold, Mr. Blakey, what kinds of associations were you able to establish between Ruby, Oswald, and the mob?
Well, you have to look at 2 things that you know well. If you accept 2 shooters in the plaza as a conspiracy, then you have to look at that tape. Either that tape is related to the assassination or it's a lone nut. And if you accept the possibility that it might be related, and then you want to look to see if there are connections between Oswald and Ruby, and who are they? And it turns out they immediately focus on Santos Trafficante in Tampa and Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. Among other things, Lee Harvey Oswald that summer in '62 was working for his uncle in a bar in New Orleans called Felix Oyster Bar. That bar had a bookmaking operation in it that was controlled by Carlos Marcello. Ruby himself ran the so-called Carousel Club. The Carousel Club got its strippers from the show bar in New Orleans that was run by Carlos Marcello's brother. So you have immediate associations, and in particular one, a man by the name of David Ferry, who hated Kennedy, expressed the notion that he ought to be shot, was working for Carlos Marcello, met with him repeatedly shortly before the assassination, and was a lifelong friend of Lee Harvey Oswald. So the associations are there. What's not there is the meeting. In other words, no smoking gun.
Right.
Loaded gun on the table.
But what's the logical explanation for Ruby carrying out mob orders at the clear expense of his own life?
Well, he's not necessarily at the expense of his own life.
Well, he's certainly going to be locked away forever.
No, it was widely believed in Texas at that time that if he did it under any burst of emotion, it would be like a manslaughter and he would serve a relatively short period of time. He had every expectation of two things: being considered a hero and getting a relatively short sentence. And once they asked him to do it, he had no real alternative.
That's true. Congressman Stokes, your committee was at least able to allow the possibility of a mafia connection. Why do you think that possibility was dismissed by the Warren Commission?
Well, the Warren Commission had actually made some investigation into Ruby's connection with Oswald, and they were unable to establish any type of conspiratorial connection between the two of them. And so at that point, they then abandoned any further investigation into organized crime itself. Our committee, however, did go into depth with the vast investigation of organized crime and its connections.
Understood. A final note. I know you've been talking to officials at the FBI and the CIA. Are those once secret files now going to be handed over to you? Will they be opened?
I have been given assurance by Bob Gates, the director of the CIA, that he has pledged his full and complete cooperation with the Congress in terms of the release of these files. And we have the same commitment from Judge Sessions, the director of the FBI.
Congressman Stokes, thank you. Robert Blakey, thank you very much. Tomorrow morning, as we continue our series, Who Killed JFK, we'll look into allegations that the federal government and the CIA may have been involved. Coming up on 8:17, we're back in a moment with the Tightwad Gazette after this.